Hello, everyone. We are here together. How
Yay,
exciting.
finally.
My mom is here visiting me, so we thought we would take this time to talk about trapped emotions because we have touched on this subject, but we haven't been actually able to delve into it like we would like to, so we can understand that it might be a little bit confusing to those who are first learning about it or first hearing about releasing emotions. So, yeah, do you want to start us off by talking about what exactly trapped emotions are?
Sure. If you think about all of us going through life and what we feel when we're going through life, sometimes you encounter events that are unpleasant, and you may be just too busy to be able to identify and actually pay attention to what you're feeling inside. Or you may just be mourning or grieving and you don't want to feel it, you don't want to hurt, you don't want to talk about it. That's another reason to trap emotions. This is it's basically negative energy that we are trapping, and it has a tendency to vibrate within us. And so when you encounter someone that has a lot of trapped emotions, you may identify them as someone that has negative baggage, or oh, they've got a lot of baggage with them. You don't want to enter into a relationship with that person because they got a lot of baggage. You've heard that kind of thing before.
Yeah, it's like dad always says this quote. I'm not sure where he got it from, but it's everybody lights up a room. Either it lights up when you enter the room or it lights up when you leave the room. And that's really what trapped emotions.
The
uh,
difference that trapped emotions can make,
Yes,
right?
yeah, because that negative energy makes a huge difference. I mean, I'm sure everyone can relate. We've all met people who just kind of drain your energy from the negativity.
Or we've all been in those situations where we have done it ourselves.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Like, if mom ain't happy, nobody happy.
That's true in my house. I guess I should not be proud of that. I think it's also important to realize that sometimes we trap emotions because we don't have a name for the emotion. Like we are consciously not realizing that we are feeling a certain way. And to us, it just feels like, oh, I have anxiety. Oh, I feel depressed. Oh, I feel stressed out.
Right. In fact, those are lots of terms that we encounter all the time when people come to us. It's like, well, tell me what's going on. And they might say, oh, I'm dealing with a lot of anxiety. I just feel anxious all the time. When in reality, it might be other things like fear over something, or, they've got that fear vibrating, or they might be anxious because they actually feel anger inside and they don't know what to do with it. And they just feel off and they can't figure out what's going on. So trapped emotions can, really upset our well-being.
I,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I was just also gonna say that, we've talked about on this channel how we're programmed from the ages of 0 to 7. And so, especially for people who had kind of traumatic childhoods and you trap those emotions really early on, they just compound throughout your life. So it just gets worse and worse and worse. So maybe you trapped anger at a young age, and all of a sudden something happened to you when you're 35 years old that caused you to be angry, and that anger all the way up through your childhood and your whole life just is exponentially worse than it probably would be without that trapped emotion.
Right, right. And if you have trapped certain emotions, like sometimes certain emotions from your parents, you will be very familiar with, and so your energy actually has a tendency to trap those emotions because it feels so familiar to you that you will trap them. So if you had an angry father, it's familiar, and so you will trap that anger within you, and then you will feel it vibrate throughout your life. Yeah,
I
that's
think
a good
that's
point.
yeah, I think that's also a good segue into like the different types of trapped emotions because there are different types that we can have. They're not always just from us because we are energetic beings that are connected in some way to other people because we feel compassion and we are connected to people. So one of them is inherited emotions, which is when you are pretty much born with an emotion that one of your ancestors or just your parents trapped and it got passed down onto you because it hadn't been released before you were born.
Right. So those inherited emotions, people don't realize that they can actually trap an inherited emotion or have an inherited emotion. So what that is like Kiara was saying, generations it could be 200 generations back. I've had that. I've been able to release those before, and I'm sure you have too, where someone probably in Adam and Eve's time trapped an emotion, and then it just got that vibration, or that every emotion has a specific vibration, and that vibration just came down from one conceived baby to the next.
Well, they talk about the generational curses,
Right,
right? And
right.
that's what they are. Essentially, it's just this like, oh, my father was abusive and angry, and it's just been passed down on. It runs in our family. Well, that's more than likely from a trapped emotion.
Yeah, yeah. And so if you, I mean, alcoholism, things
Hmm.
like that, those are, um, we hear a lot about generational curses, and that is the trapped emotion. But what happens is when that person clear back yonder, trap that emotion, as it gets passed down from one generation to the next, it just compounds. And the reason it compounds is because that person is vibrating, and that familiar vibration will draw more of that emotion to it. And so when you feel it, it just gets vibrating even more. And so that vibration becomes so strong that it just continues to compound, excuse me, through the generations.
And I think it's also important to realize that the trapped emotion doesn't manifest the same in everybody. So we're not saying like it's impossible to break this, vicious cycle of this trapped emotion. You can, but you have to be very conscious about it. But that emotion still resides in you. It's just going to come out a different way. So like you may not be, a super angry parent like your parents were or their parents were, but eventually that vibration is going to catch up to you in one way or the other.
Yeah, and there are personalities and how we deal with different vibrations. So you may have one that has a tendency to be more, to manifest things more outwardly, or you may have someone that manifests things inwardly, and then that vibration plays havoc on like mental health
Mhm.
or on physical health, such as in the heart or the circulatory system. It could play havoc on the organs, things like that. So yeah, that's a really good point too.
Yeah. Another one that's similar to this one is shared emotions. If there is a person that experiences the same negative event as you and has the same emotional response as you, like you both feel anger or fear, then you can both trap that emotion from that same event. And it's important to realize that because we're connected, we can just trap it from somebody else as well, right? Even if you don't feel that same emotion, you can trap someone else's emotion from that event.
Well, what it is you feel it, you just aren't able to identify it. So like someone comes walking into the room and they might be vibrating something, and you might be able to know that something's off because you feel that vibration, but you aren't familiar with all of the emotions on the gamut type thing. And so then you end up trapping that because you aren't able to identify it and talk about it with that person or whatever. And more than likely that person hasn't been talking about it, or they have, and that's why they're vibrating at that time. But yeah, you can trap that emotion inside of you too.
Yeah, like a lot of kids will share emotions with their parents that the
Very
kids have
important.
no idea that their parents are feeling, but since they're around them all the time, they experience that same type of vibration from them.
Yeah. We work a lot with a lot of kids. Parents will be like, well, I want to take care of myself. And then as they see the process happen and they're like, this is so good. Oh no, what have I been sharing with my children? And they want their children cleared as well, because trapped emotions can play havoc. They don't want their kids to get to the same point that they got to. And it's just healthy for the kids to be able to be themselves. So if we get cleared out of the inherited trapped emotions, we basically have chain breakers that we're working with, right? They come in and they get cleared, and that has broken. So it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, and God has many ways of healing us, and we're grateful to
Yeah,
be part of it.
for sure.
So,
What's the other type of trapped emotion? Oh,
yeah.
our pre-earth emotions. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, pre-earth. So pre-earth, if you think about it, we are eternal beings. We are spirits having a mortal experience, and we lived as spirits for, we don't know how long before. I mean, we're told that we are eternal, so we lived a long time.
Yeah.
But you have to realize that our spirits are what feel emotion. that's how we feel, that's how we move, that's how we experience life, is with our spirit. And when we feel that emotion, it's the same kind of thing. If we did not talk about it or identify it at that time, or we're too busy, then we ended up trapping that. And I think that there are lots of things that we experienced in the pre-earth life that were that could have been pretty hard.
Yeah. I think that for some people, this may be a really like new conversation to have, but I was also thinking about all the clients that I've worked with, and even though some have never thought about there being life before this earth, every time they've had one of those types of emotions come up, they've always really resonated with them and it always seemed right with them. And it just actually provided them a lot of relief.
Yeah, it does. And sometimes I'll have people come to me and say, I don't know what I have. I feel like it's a really, really old emotion,
Mm.
and or a block that has been there before I came to this earth, and actually sometimes it's not only pre-earth, but it's the inheritance that they come with
Yeah.
too. And
Yeah.
and so um and it just sounds so familiar to them. And then when we are able to identify what that emotion is, they're like, oh my goodness, that is exactly what I have been feeling. So
Yeah.
it's very cool to see the process of identifying these and releasing them.
Yeah. I feel like people never really understand until they get them released and then they're like, oh, yeah, that was having a really big effect on me.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know how we were talking about how you get busy and you're just going through life, or you don't talk about your emotions and stuff. Sometimes we have guys that are a little bit reluctant to come in because they think they're going to have to talk about. That's one thing that we ought to mention, is that you don't have to talk about anything.
It's a very non-invasive process. It's about as invasive as you want it to be.
Yeah, you can choose to talk about. I encourage people to talk, but I'm not going to force them to talk about it,
Not gonna
because
be nosy about it.
right, sometimes it's just a process of being aware of what kinds of trapped emotions that you do trap, what kind of emotions you do trap.
Yeah.
And that's a nice awareness, but people don't want to dredge up the past. And it's not only guys that don't want to dredge it up. There are lots of women who don't want to dredge it up because it just hurts too much. But the release is still there. It still happens. You don't have to talk about it in order for it to happen. But what happens with that process is they are still able to get the relief, and then they're made aware of how they trapped the emotion in the first place. And so that it's a very healthy process to talk about your emotions, which brings us to guys. In and I don't know, is it so much a thing now as it was when I was growing up, and previous generations
I
too.
think people are more aware of it now than they have been. I think there's been a more of an awakening, but I still feel like we were raised by your generation, like my generation was.
Mhm.
And so I still think it's really hard for a lot of guys too.
Well, so guys trap emotions.
Maybe
And
more than women do.
we've had some, and we'll talk about heart walls in a minute, but we've had some guys come in with some pretty hefty heart walls that they build around their hearts because they were just told not to cry, not to talk about their emotions, not to show emotion, because it was not a very acceptable cultural thing then. And it was shown as a weakness if you showed emotion. So that's not very fun for guys. But also, a lot of times their role was to provide for the family. And so they would just be so busy and so focused on trying to provide for the family. But if you get fired from a job, or if things happen to your family that you're worried about their safety and things like that, um, it's like running down the football field, and you catch that football and you stuff it. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're stuffing footballs. Here's another emotion. I'm going to stuff it.
And they're not going to the end zone.
Not to release it until they get somewhere where they can release it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times we notice the biggest difference with guys when they clear it, just because it's such a night and day feeling for them to have that release.
It's nice for them, and they feel validated probably for the first time in their life, like,
Yeah, that's true.
oh wow, this is something that, yes, I have struggled with. And you know what's really cool too is I have had people say that this was the first time that they have actually felt God's love for them when they go through this process. They just felt understood, because so many guys, or sometimes even women, just have not felt understood before. But when we really think that God is a huge part of this healing process, and that He is there helping them to heal. And when we identify those emotions, it's like for the first time, somebody understands, somebody identified it for me, someone was there to help me heal. And we know that we're just instruments in the whole process. We aren't the ones actually doing it. It's God.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about heart walls, Kiara? We haven't really talked much about heart walls.
Heart walls, yes. So basically, heart walls are super exciting. Um, basically, what happens when you go through a experience that your brain perceives as negative, you will trap that negative energy, and when you feel that feeling of heartbreak or heartache, that is pretty much your brain taking that energy and starting to build a radius wall around your heart to protect it from feeling those feelings and to try and just save yourself from feeling that in the future. Um, Heart walls can get absolutely huge. They can get up to millions of feet, but more often than not, they're in the tens of thousands of feet.
That's the average, yeah, is in the
Which
tens of
it
thousands.
seems so large. It does, but they can usually be cleared pretty fast, but it just shows you. I really like it because it's like that visual that shows you how much of an impact that heart wall can have on you.
Yeah.
And how much of an impact it can have on other people. So one of the cons of having a heart wall is that it can, I should say, prevent you from feeling fully, feeling love from other people fully, or prevent other people from loving you fully, because we tend to push people away when we're vibrating like that. Um, and most importantly, to feel God's love. It can prevent you from feeling God's love, which is like you were talking about how people were saying it was the first time they were able to really feel God's love.
Yeah. So another thing to think about is if the heart wall gets out to a certain extent, and sometimes it just depends on the extent of traumatic events the person has been through. You've seen some people that have hearts of stone. You would say, oh, they're just cold-hearted, or they have hearts of stone. More than likely, that person has just been through a whole lot of hurt, or they came to this life with a whole lot of hurt, or they inherited a whole lot of hurt. And so, sometimes I was thinking about some babies who come to this life, they just seem more anxious, or some kids just seem more angry. It's because they came that way, with those emotions already stored in. I think that that's a lot of the reasons that they do.
Yeah, sometimes it can be something else, but
Right.
occasionally you do have the ones that a release could be a really good thing for.
Yeah, who knows, all of the exact reasons, because it could be medical, it could be other things as well that are going on physically with that baby.
Yeah.
As well. So a heart wall, when we release the heart wall, there's actually a period of time that it takes to heal from that. There's a processing time in between each session where the emotions have the opportunity to process out. We tell people it's basically like going through spiritual heart surgery when we do a heart wall, and it can take quite a bit of time depending on how big the heart wall was, how long they've had the heart wall. We don't necessarily determine when they got the heart wall. They could have come, like we said, to this earth with a heart wall already. But we will test and see how long it is going to take that person to eventually heal from that heart surgery, that spiritual heart surgery.
But it subtly gets better over
Yes.
time. It's not like, oh, 5 years, okay, bam. It's like over time, you'll notice certain changes, you'll feel better in certain circumstances. Overall, you'll just have a sense of more peace, and it will just continue to get better until that time comes where you're fully.
Yeah, a better sense of well-being through all of it. And that's what some people are like, well, so I'm just going to be this way forever, but it's like, no, It's like turtles moving through a cloud of peanut butter. That's why I tell people it's that slow, and you just pray and ask to see the differences. Some people actually feel an immediate change. I started feeling the change after the first time. When I think back to my instance when I went through the process, that I was able to feel a slight immediate change, and then after weeks, I started feeling lighter and brighter and more calm and more peaceful, like I was able to do things
I think
with more
that,
ease.
yeah, I also think that people who are in a more like dire situation or like intense current circumstance that get worked on will probably notice more of an immediate effect than those who maybe just feel like they're having some type of block in their life or
Mhm.
are just interested
Yeah, I've
in
worked with
healing.
some people who have been grieving for like 20 years plus, and just have been in that depressed state. And they do feel a slight difference, but it's just going to take time because we're excavating those vibrations within the spirit.
The 20 years
Yeah.
of vibrations.
Yeah, yeah. So it can be pretty intense sometimes. I mean, as far as identifying the emotions and actually having that release, it's a wonderful thing that way.
Yeah,
So,
I
can
think
we think of anything else?
I don't think so. I think
Yeah.
we covered all the basics. If you have any more questions, you can comment or send us a message. We would be happy to get ideas of questions that people have so we can make a bit more videos.
And we'll probably be separate again because I'm going back home soon.
Yes.
It's been so fun being with Kiara. I love being with her, and we just have fun together.
Yep, we do. All right. See you next time. Thanks.